Welcome to our virtual happy hour discussion hosted by young professionals at Washington Policy Center. My name is Miranda Hawkins. I am the Young Professionals Director. And for those of you who haven't heard of our YP group, we are a diverse community of young professionals aimed to educate and empower anyone 18 to 40 years of age on important issues affecting our state. We believe in policies that enrich lives by giving everyday people unobstructed opportunities to innovate what needs to be fixed. To this end, we embrace free market solutions, civil debate, and what we like to call policy plus action mindset, where we talk it like we walk it like we talk it, actively seeking ways to make Washington State a better place to live. And that's why we're here tonight. I hope you all have a drink in hand. I know I do. My favorite. And we're going to hear from 3 speakers tonight. Our first, who I'm going to introduce in just a second. But tonight we really want to talk to you about what does the economic outlook and future of Tri-Cities and Hanford area look like. We're living through unprecedented times, and we hope this event will help you navigate through some of the questions you have concerning your city. We'll be featuring 3 speakers: David Reeploeg, Vice President of Federal Programs for Tri-Cities Development Council; Ajsa, Suljic, Regional Labor Economist for Washington State Employment Security Department; and Jason Mercier, Director for Government Reform at Washington Policy Center, who will provide an update on WBC's COVID-19 recommendations. At the end, we will have a Q&A session. You can submit your questions using the chat feature on your control panel, or by emailing rharris@washingtonpolicy.org. All right, so to kick us off, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, David Reeploeg. So David is the Vice President for Federal Programs of the Tri-City Development Council, also known as TRIDEC. David comes to TRIDEC from the office of U.S. Senator Maria Cantwell, where he served as Central Washington Director from 2008 to 2017. Prior to accepting the position with Senator Cantwell, David served as the State Administrative Director/Scheduler for U.S. Senator Patty Murray from 2005 to 2008. David is a native of the Tri-Cities. He's married to his high school sweetheart, Gretchen, and has two children. David, thanks for joining us tonight. You can go ahead and share your screen and audio.
Okay, can everybody see and hear me? Just checking to confirm that maybe Miranda, you can confirm that people can see and hear me?
Yeah, you're good to go, David.
Okay, great, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's great to be here. And as Miranda mentioned, I do have a fairly young family. I got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old who have been instructed to not come into the office while I am doing this, but there's always a chance that I might get a visit. So if that is the case, please bear with me. But again, I really appreciate having the chance to visit with young professionals and be a part of this virtual happy hour. As a little bit of just quick background about TRIDEC, TRIDEC is short for the Tri-City Development Council. It was founded in 1963, first as the Tri-Cities Nuclear Industrial Council, or TRIDEC, as it was known then. And what was, I think, really unique about the organization back in 1963 was it was really focused on supporting the mission at the Hanford site, plutonium production, and it was founded by business owners who recognized that the local economy sort of rose or fell based on whatever Congress appropriated on any given year. But rather than just being kind of Richland or Hanford focused, they took a regional approach, including all 3 of the Tri-Cities and Benton and Franklin counties, which at that time was really kind of a novel concept. And so it evolved to become more of a traditional economic development organization by the mid-1980s, changed its name to TRIDEC. And so in addition to that federal agenda that I kind of am in charge of, we also have now been doing business recruitment and retention and expansion as well for quite a few years now. We have a 42-member board of directors that has representatives from all of the cities, counties, and ports, both on the elected side as well as administrators, as well as a bunch of folks from industry, from higher ed, from the Hanford contractors, from the Department of Energy and P&L, as well as hospitals. And I think we believe it's very representative of the community and the economic interests in the community. And then we have about 300 member investors. And our primary focus is on kind of the base industries, the ones that create family wage jobs, with the idea that we export, whether it be goods or talent or services or whatever, but to add wealth to the Tri-City community. Most of what we're going to be talking about today is not specific to COVID or the coronavirus impacts, but that is very much top of mind for us. In many ways, we've sort of pivoted over the last 2 or 3 months to really be focused on supporting the local economy, supporting local businesses, and taking the next steps towards reopening and economic recovery. And I'd be happy to talk more about that if there are questions later on in the program. But for right now, I'd like to also just kind of move on to the importance of Hanford and the Pacific Northwest National Lab to the community. And I should probably speak to some of this better than me. I got some of these numbers from her, but the economic impact of Hanford and P&L is significant here in the Tri-Cities. If any of you are like me and grew up here, you probably will remember there were some times where the economy was really impacted in a negative way, going back into the 80s and early 90s, with changes in funding and missions at the Hanford site. We have now, as a community, we've grown substantially since then. We have diversified in our economy, but still by wage and by kind of value, approximately 25% of the community's payroll or wages come from either Hanford or Pacific Northwest National Lab. And one job at Hanford or P&L essentially creates 2 jobs elsewhere in the community. So it is still a significant player in our Tri-City economy. And I think it's important to note also that the Hanford mission will remain for decades to come. And so it's going to be a consistent part of our daily lives here in the Tri-Cities in one way or another, at least until the 2060s or 2070s. And in that respect, advocating for funding and policies necessary to expedite the cleanup and do it in the best possible way is a big part of still of what we do. And one of the challenges that we face as we look towards the decades-long future of Hanford cleanup is how do we do it in a way that Congress will feel like it's investing in Hanford cleanup gives them a good return on that investment. How do we do it in a way that makes sense to get to a standard that's reasonable, that's safe for the environment, for the community, for the general public, and for the environment, but not using standards that are so high that they're not realistically achievable, they'll take so long, or they'll cost so much that there's no realistic way that Congress is going to fund it. And so that's kind of the balancing act, and that's what we're trying to really push for new approaches that can perhaps get some of that work done sooner and at a lower cost, but again, still in a way that that's safe. Now, looking forward, we really are trying to shift, I think, the way that the Tri-Cities was seen maybe 20, 30 years ago as the place where everybody who lived there glows in the dark, and where it was known as one of the most contaminated places in America, but instead using or leveraging all the capabilities that we have because of Hanford and because of the National Lab to support innovation and looking at the economy of the future. And I think there's a broad range of possible opportunities that I'd be happy to talk about more, but a few of those key opportunity areas are first in nuclear. We now are living in a world where we have the Clean Energy Transformation Act that was passed by the state legislature a couple of years ago that's going to mandate pretty substantial changes in how people can, in the power that's available, the sources of electricity that are available for people. We also are in a world where a lot of the coal-fired plants in the Pacific Northwest region are going to be retired here pretty soon. And the reality is that if you need to have carbon-free electricity and you need to have it available anytime, day and night, when the sun is shining or when it's not, when the wind is blowing or when it's not, nuclear is really your only option, in addition to the robust hydropower system that we also have as a kind of backbone of our region. But we feel like nuclear, both here in the Pacific Northwest region, but also folks across the country and across the world, are recognizing that value of carbon-free electrical generation. So we really would like to position, or continue to position, the Tri-Cities as a place for nuclear innovation, whether that be in the supply chain for some of the advanced reactors that are being developed. We have a small office from NuScale that is one of the leading small modular reactor companies in the United States. So we'd very much like to be a part of that supply chain. We think that with our skilled workforce that is already familiar with nuclear, a very pro-nuclear community, as well as the transportation gateways that we have both by river and by rail and by highway, we really are a good fit for supply chain manufacturing and assembly associated with nuclear. We also have a great deal of capabilities in the nuclear fuels. There's a lot of interest, and I think there's a need for advanced fuels to begin being used. Many of them are called HALEU, or high activity low enrichment uranium. And there's a lot of innovation opportunities capitalizing on both the fact that we have the Framatome manufacturing facility here in the Tri-Cities, as well as the radiochemistry expertise of N&L. And then I think lastly, and certainly not least, we are very interested in the possibility of a new small modular reactor that would be located out at Energy Northwest's WNP1 site. There's a whole host of reasons that that would make a lot of sense, and one of them being it would save, because of the work that's already been done at that site, it could save up to $300 million versus starting from scratch somewhere else. Another area is energy storage. Again, as we build more renewable energy, whether it's wind turbines, solar, whatever it might be, the need to be able to store that energy in a way that at the grid level, at the grid scale, that can be used by utilities when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining is going to be increasingly important. And we're very fortunate that Pacific Northwest National Lab is the nation's leader in these technologies. And so we're very much looking at trying to build an ecosystem of companies that can leverage those capabilities, the technology and the expertise to kind of start up and grow or expand their battery technology and manufacturing. Also, we certainly haven't forgotten about the agricultural industry. That's the other kind of key backbone of our economy. And as we look toward the future of agriculture and recognizing that there's growing challenges associated with agricultural labor, especially in the labor-intensive agriculture that we have in central Washington, looking at opportunities for innovation in things like mechanical harvesting, rather than having workers out there having to do all the picking. You could have mechanical harvesting. We have a lot of expertise with WSU in Prosser, their research station in Prosser, along with a USDA research station there. And then the other thing is the way that we use water very much could look different 50 years from now for, again, any number of reasons. But how do we apply water to crops at the most important times? What's the right amount of water? There's a lot of research and development and technology that can come out of that. And then I think in the interest of time, the last two things I would mention for right now is kind of reflecting on what has changed or what might change as a result of what we're all seeing with COVID. There is more and more talk about reshoring, taking some of our supply chain that has moved overseas over the last number of decades and bringing it back here. And that very much could be an opportunity for us in any of the areas that I've already mentioned or others. And so that's another area that we're looking at. And then lastly, there's more and more discussion kind of connected with that about, we have all these large metropolitan areas where you think of Seattle or San Francisco or Boston that are kind of the technology hubs for our country. And I think there's some thinking now, and the Brookings Institution just recently released a study that begins asking the question is that the right way to do it? Does that make sense to have all of that technology expertise in those areas? And would it make sense? Would it be potentially a draw for some of the the employees who maybe don't want to live in large urban areas, who might be were of the age where they have young kids, have families that might want to live in an area more like the Tri-Cities. And so that's another area that we are certainly exploring that I think leverages and takes advantage of the science and technology backbone that we have here in the Tri-Cities as well. So those are at least just some initial thoughts, and I would be happy to answer any questions as the program continues.
All right, well, thank you, David, and a big thank you to everyone you work with at TRIDEC. If you have questions for David, don't forget, we'll be bringing our panelists together at the end of the event for Q&A. And I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Ajsa Suljic. Ajsa is a regional labor economist with Washington Employment Security Department. And bring her picture up here. She is responsible for economic analysis of the local areas in southeastern Washington and statewide. Ajsa provides economic information and analysis to the local economic planners, administrators, local businesses, and residents, and all other information seekers. She is a regular speaker at community events and has a big heart for helping the people in our region. Ajsa, take it away.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here with you today, and I really enjoy Young Professionals group very much. And thank you, David, for introducing Hanford area. And I besides what you have mentioned, it's like I would not add nothing extra except from the perspective that we are in a great place in the state of Washington and in the nation as well, where we are seeing some of those diversifications that you have mentioned, David, play a big role right now during COVID-19 pandemic and affecting local community and local economy. And when I look at the numbers that I have, the benefit of having Hanford and the cluster of industries within Hanford area, let's say North Richland area, that has spurred up just from building a nuclear stockpile to now clean up and research and so forth. That's in that segment that's contributing a great deal, not only to the industries and jobs, but to whole community and quality of life we have locally. Expansion in occupations that we have and associated occupations that are within that cluster is being developing, and it's going to rechange again from purely just cleanup to different style of repackaging that waste into something else and moving forward. I'm always just amazed to what kind of work is being done there, to what extent our workforce and people who are living locally and they're raising their kids and family locally, and they're spending money locally on the services that are available to all of us, but especially when you have higher wage income earners that come from that Hanford cluster, they are able to buy much more of these products than just in general individuals who are not following those occupations or industries are paying higher wages. So I will take a little bit into deeper dive into numbers. I want to reflect on what's happening right now, where we are at, and how are we handling COVID-19, the diversification of industries that we have at the local area. So hopefully you're able to see my screen. I'm sharing my screen. Okay, I thought so. So I'm gonna take it away. So starting with just an overview of Employment Security Department. I'm sure that you have full of Employment Security Department and news from us and more initial claims, how are we doing, what are we coping, and even right now, how are we doing and working with the intruder frauds coming on and so forth. So let me give you quick overview of Employment Security Department. We stand with our vision to empower one of the best and most future-ready workforce, and with all of our opportunities around the state, and that includes us locally. We are working very hard to work with partners and our worker employees and so forth to provide all available services to our population in the state of Washington and our businesses in the state of Washington to move forward, to innovate, and to create a better future for our population here. Also, our mission is to have very inclusive workforce solutions that promote economic resilience and prosperity. And you will see that our workforce solutions range from job seeker to employers to families, and back to me as labor market provider, labor market information provider. We do strive to, and we live by our core values, and values drive every decision we do. Right now, our primary goal is to get all the funding and all the money that is available and they qualify for to all the individuals who have lost their jobs, and also to prevent any fraud or slow down the fraud that comes up along with all the downturns and influx of funding, especially when we have extra $600 coming from federal government to individuals who are unemployed. Those criminals come online, they try to take some of that money and benefit themselves or countries or other places. And we want to make sure to stop that and get that money back into the pockets of individuals who qualify and deserve it through their hard work for many years. There's many different departments in our agency. I am one of them, and I'm the final side of everything that happens within our agency. We have an employment benefits distribution and administration of unemployment benefits, and we provide these temporary benefits to all individuals that qualify. Before there was a lot of requirements on how you qualify. If you're a part-time worker, 680 hours, full-time 120, 1,200 hours and so forth. And if you quit or fire, and there's a lot of things that go in the background to make the decision if you qualify for those benefits or not, to protect both you as well as an employer who could sometimes not be at fault, could be at fault for the loss of job for yourself. So we have great individuals who are working diligently to make sure the benefits are distributed accordingly, accordingly to law and so forth. A new program that came for us, we just started last year, really collecting all the money and the distribution of first benefits started this year. It's paid family medical leave, and paid medical family leave is new benefits that provide additional funding for individuals that go through regular leave they have from employers, and which guarantees them a position or a job after they come back. So it would be an extension of the paid family leave that you have already with your employers, but it will give you an additional opportunity to come back to the employer after you're done, and you get some money paid. You're going to get paid from the state for doing that. This program is such a great integration and speaks a great deal of the Employment Security Department and how we scaled up to go from ground zero to be one of the innovators in the whole United States on this program, and to scale up and to start distributing funding within 14 months from initiating the bill to developing the program infrastructure and everything, to starting distributing that funding to local population. Also, we have employment connections. This is all about jobs and training. Employment connections is integrated in worksource centers, and it works within communities. It works within communities around the state, and we have over 46 workforce centers around the state, and there's a lot of affiliates as well. In each one of these workforce centers, there's individuals who can help job seekers with their resumes, job search, interviews, mock interviews, and so forth. But then also workforce centers can help employers do job fairs, job hiring, job postings. For example, use labor market information to do scale wage scales, pay grade levels for their positions and so forth. So there's a lot going on within job centers and workforce centers, where employment security is one of the primary partners. We have other partners that contribute to that with other services for youth, disruptive worker programs, or for individuals with LNI, DVR, and so forth. Employer services, on the other hand, we have that unit working in collection of unemployment benefits that employers pay for every worker they have for the wages they pay. And also in employer services, we include all of the additional services I just have mentioned, and all of these services are free to employers as well. They can post their jobs on WorkSource website. They can recruit through the WorkSource website, which is kind of a hands-on job match. And then finally, there's labor market information. We have a lot of great resources for labor market information. We are local. We collect a lot of data on employers, a lot of data on job seekers and occupations, wages, occupation style, type, knowledge, abilities, education, training requirements, and so forth. And then we distribute a lot of information on county, city, and workforce development area levels, metropolitan statistical area. Sometimes you will hear me talk about Benton Franklin counties as one, but I have information for both separately. And if I mention something like Kennewick, Pasco, Richland, MSA, that would include both counties together and all cities together as well. So it's not only Kennewick, Pasco, Richland that we are talking about, it's designated area from US Census, both counties as one. They just named it as Kennewick, Pasco, Richland, MSA. We try to drive this information out to you right away. One of the things that COVID-19 changed for us is, like, we had monthly news releases for employment and unemployment statistics, for example, but we never had weekly releases on initial claims. So right now, every Thursday at 10 a.m., we release new unemployment initial claim statistics for all the counties statewide, on all demographics, industries, and occupations that are available to be published. We are very careful to screen for confidentiality, and we take that value to heart. We try to protect individuals as well as employers of any disclosure that's not acceptable by the law. So if you see something going on, make sure to let me know, because we take that statistic carefully, and we just release what's available to be released and condense everything that's not. So I want to take you into statistics. So now you know Employment Security Department, there's more hats than one there that's going on. And our jobs are changing always, and I'm sure yours as well. We developed a new technology in how we analyze data, how we protect data, how we protect statistics and communities, and how do we safely distribute this information so you can make right decisions in your life, on your job, or even for your kids. If you're making decisions on what college, degree, or occupation your kid is going to, or if you want to change occupation from this to next, what does it take you to do that? So going back to just share numbers, I want to share these numbers with you because it's very important to know how our local community is dealing with COVID-19. Historically, COVID-19 would have been much more devastating than it is right now. You see it in sheer numbers of job losses, and the ripple effect that's going to come after that. Nobody can comprehend that. We have a lot of economists working on it, but nobody can comprehend the ripple effect of what the sheer number of jobs that has just happened within a month, and now 2 months running. So this is very historical. How it plays out to our local community is that starting I-5 corridor early March, late February, early March is when things started going on around Seattle area, I-5. But May 15th, you should remember that day. For the rest, it's going to be history books, is that when the stay home, stay healthy order came in effect, and the closure of major businesses at the local level started happening. So what has started happening at the local level was happening statewide. Let's look at the numbers. We don't have, by the end of June, we'll have majority of all the numbers, but right now this is what we have. In March, nationally, 870,000 jobs were lost, 2.5 million in April. So that's huge job loss within a month and a half. From March 15th till mid-April is when the data is collected. We lost over 21 million jobs nationally. Let's look at it on initial claims. The loss of jobs almost mimics a number of initial claims that happened at the same time period for national level. Looking at the state of Washington, 225,400 jobs were lost that we could have accounted for in March. Most of these jobs in March were coming from the I-5 corridor because that was happening already from 1st to 12th. Our statistics are collected 1st to 12th. So when we got statistics for our area, our effect of COVID started on the 15th. So 3 days afterward, and the numbers for local community in March 15 are not reflecting what was actually happening in March. So state of Washington started April 2020 reflects what happened late March and early April, 527,000 jobs lost. That's a lot. Last time we saw that much, it was 1932. The loss of these jobs was so significant that initial UI claims by even May 19th reached over 1 million for state of Washington. We have over 3 million people in the labor force, and then we have over 1 million people initiating claims. And a lot of these individuals who are initiating claims too include those self-employed. And take into account the majority of all these statistics that I just mentioned don't talk about people who are working self-employed. But initial claims right now, because of the CARES Act, include those individuals who are initiating claims, who are self-employed, or working gig economy, and they have less than 680 hours for their base year to apply for unemployment benefits. Significant numbers, a lot. But look at this. This is national numbers. So the loss, monthly job loss, since 1939, right there in the left-hand side of this. World War II demobilization, not even, go back. It's not even close. Great Recession, not even close. Look at COVID-19 effect. It hasn't been seen in history ever. This many jobs, 1 month, monthly job loss has not been recorded since 1939. And just to mention, collection statistics started in 1930s. So we don't have anything backwards to that date. But we never had this many jobs. We never had this great economy to progress. And on the other side, unemployment rate nationally is 14.7%. It's literally 10% increase. So we had 4.7, so plus 10% to that. So significant increase in unemployment rate. But Great Recession in 1932 was at 25.5%, so we were still a little bit below that. But coming actual May numbers, we may increase to those levels as well. Washington State numbers, over 527,000 jobs lost, 15.4% unemployment rate. Most of these job losses in early March and April from I-5 corridor and the Seattle area took big hit in regards of this COVID-19 effect on jobs. Benton Franklin counties, we had loss of 300 jobs only in March. From February to March, only 300 jobs. In April, we don't have April numbers yet. We are expecting that these April numbers will reflect that early from March 15 to April 15. It will reflect that sheer number of jobs lost, and that was close to 21,000 in those numbers. And in regards of initial claims, that most likely will be reflected as well in April numbers. But by the end of April, we had well over 21,000 initial claims. And by now, this last week, 18th week of this year, 31,000 initial claimants in the community. To give you a perspective of that, that's about 21% of total labor force. And if you, that's everybody that's working. We have over 145,000 people in labor force, and 31,000 of them initiated claims since March 15th, and that's about 21.3% total labor force of people who are locally living in the community. In regards to Benton Franklin region, some of the industries that took the major hit from COVID-19 includes construction, healthcare and social assistance, retail trade, accommodation, food services, and we have manufacturing. All the other industries were safe. We have 22 major industries in local community, and we can, I'm going to take you to the next slide now, and you're going to take a look at quickly what those industries are. But the cluster of Hanford, which is very important for our community, if they were not able to telecommute and work from home, which about 60% of their workforce is telecommuting and 40% are not telecommuting, they're still essential. And if they're not working on site, they are getting paid. So their wages are getting paid, which is saving our community. If this cluster was to lay off, there will be additional close to 20,000 individuals initiating claims, and average annual wages for this Hanford cluster is close to $100,000. The sheer loss of the jobs from just that single cluster would have brought down to our economy to the brick. It would break it. But we are very fortunate that this community has the Hanford style funding, Hanford jobs and businesses that contribute to the stability of the community. These individuals are working from home, contributing to their jobs, and still able to buy their food, fuel, and everything else in local community. The most impacted, you can see, are service industries. Industries are directly related to customers. Construction work, you can't do construction work from home. So this is very significant for all of you to take a look at. And on this next slide, just want to highlight something for you in the future. It doesn't matter what level of education you're in. If you are in those industries that are directly related to customer service during COVID-19, you got impacted. If you can't provide this direct service to your customer, you got impacted. Management occupations is #1 occupation that got impacted here at 13% of our claimants. Food preparation, construction, office, administrative, sales, and personal services. I didn't go into much detail, but I have 66 occupations here. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm going to cut in. We're going to leave some time for Jason to give his update.
Thank
so
you.
I have a couple good questions for you from our audience, and so we'll get back to you. And all of these links to these documents and to everything Ajsa was discussing are going to be in your chat box. So if you would like to see these statistics and read more about how the current employment rates and the work Ajsa is doing with employment in general and bringing employment to the city, how it affects Tri-Cities and Hanford, you can check out those links. And then you can also reach out to her by email. But we are going to transition into Jason now. Jason Mercier works for Washington Policy Center. He's the director of the Center for Government Reform at Washington Policy Center and is based in the Tri-Cities. Jason keeps our government transparent, honest, and accountable. What more could you ask for? He has testified numerous times before legislative committees, and his research appears regularly in newspapers, news outlets across the state. In 2008, he worked with lawmakers to create the state's renowned budget transparency website and has been a champion for many of the state's important budget reform tools, including the 4-year balanced budget requirement adopted in 2012. In the words of Jason, every vacation I take is at Disneyland because I need to escape the fantasy of Olympia for something more based in reality. Jason, take it away.
Hey, thank you very much, Miranda. And after the jobs report from ESD and before I get into the budget update, it might be a good time to take your glasses. I've got my Disney glass here and refill it. I wish I had some better news to share on the budget, but first I wanted to briefly address some of the questions surrounding the governor's emergency powers. I know there's been a lot of concern expressed about that. And Washington State is a little bit different than what you've seen in some of the other states. Our governor has very broad authority from the legislature for emergency declarations. And there's 2 parts of that law that he is exercising. There's the general emergency powers, and then there's when you see him waive parts of regulations or state law. And it's only that second part, only when state law or state regulations are waived, that the legislature is required to be brought back into the conversation. That is limited to 30 days. So when you hear questions about the governor has issued a certain order, it's been longer than 30 days, why isn't the legislature required to be brought back in? That is limited only for those times waiving state law. The broader emergency powers, such as the stay-home orders, the declarations, those are not restricted by time as far as a legislative check-in. So in Washington State, it is possible for the governor's broader emergency powers to be executed and authorized indefinitely. And that's something that we think that you may want to take a look at when the legislature comes back into special session, because that is a lot of power for just one individual to have this kind of indefinite, unlimited authority for these emergency restrictions that we live under. And if you think about the emergency powers in a historical context, we're usually thinking about earthquakes, a volcanic eruption, a bridge collapse, a flood, things that are very time limited and usually very local in impact. But when you're talking about a potential of a global pandemic coming in waves, that's something that maybe you would want to have a little more of a legislative check-in, which is the legislative branch of government, the lawmaking branch. And when you look across the country, you do see several states have that. Wisconsin, after 60 days, the governor is required to get approval from the legislature. And there was a recent ruling in Oregon that you may be aware of, though it's currently under review by their state Supreme Court. In Oregon, if the governor issues an emergency proclamation for a health reason, that is supposed to be limited to 28 days unless the legislature comes back in. So I mentioned this just to say not that the governor has been abusing his power or doesn't have the power. The legislature is clearly granted a lot of this authority. But going forward, do we want to bring back in the legislature after, whether it's 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, just so there's some chance for the legislative branch to have some input on what's happening? And that input is important when we switch to the next update I wanted to give you on the budget. As we saw from the ESD reports, this is unprecedented job losses, and it has a significant impact on the state's economic outlook, tax collections, and the budget. And just 5 short months ago, Washington was in the midst of significant economic growth, so much so that the Washington Policy Center and others were calling on the legislature to cut taxes. You're seeing so much revenue growth rather than increased spending. We thought that was the time to return some of that back to the taxpayers. The world has changed since January. With the economy basically being shut down for the last 2 months, what that is translating into is a significant expected budget deficit. And we don't have hard numbers yet because the revenue forecast won't come out till June. But initial unofficial forecasts project at least a $7 billion budget deficit over the next 4 years, with half of that, about $3.5 billion, being in this current budget cycle. And I hate to say that is probably understated because those initial estimates were made before we were starting to see some of the tax collections come in this last month based upon those record job losses. So this has created a situation where is the legislature going to come into a special session? And just recently we saw the top budget writers in the Senate, the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Senator Rolfus, and the ranking member, Senator Braun, interviewed by TBW, asking about the prospects of a special session. What should we expect to see happen? Now, they both indicated because of a deficit of that size, you will likely see the legislature come back in sometime before January. Whether that's in June or whether that's in August or September is still to be determined. But when you're looking at a potential $3.5 billion deficit in this current budget, what does that mean? What options are on the table? We have already seen the governor order directives stopping travel, unnecessary hiring, shutting down new contracts. He has sent out a budget directive to all of his agencies, asking them to identify what is about 15% in savings, and that translates to about $1.9 billion in budget savings. And there's also been some question, and this is a recommendation that we've been making, should spending increases, things that haven't taken effect yet, be put on hold? And one of those is going to come due on July 1st. As part of the contract that state employees negotiated with the governor, they are due a 3% pay raise on July 1st. So in the context of record unemployment, significant job losses in the private sector, and a substantial budget deficit, is this the time to be providing pay raises in the governmental sector? Or should those monies be put aside to additional savings? The other thing, the state does have a fairly good size reserve account. Now, Miranda was talking about some of the budget reforms we've worked on as partly the 4-year balanced budget requirement. There were also a couple of constitutional amendments the voters passed recently requiring a protected reserve account so that money is deposited into that in the good times so that we would have it when we need it. There's about $3 billion currently in that account. So if you're starting to have some savings in the short term in the budget, you rely on those reserve accounts. That gets you a pretty good way to try and to decide how you're going to balance this budget in the long term. The other thing that we'll want to keep an eye on is what is happening in Congress. Now, there's some new calls, and some of them are speaking of fantasy, really substantial increases above and beyond what the federal government has already provided for state and local spending. That is probably not likely to happen, but what the Policy Center thinks should happen, as well as other state and local officials, is when Congress and the president first approved that original CARES Act, that original $150 billion that was allocated to the states and local governments, and Washington's share of that is about $3 billion. That needs to be provided in a more flexible way. It was restricted only for spending related to the pandemic. Now, while that might be helpful For states like Washington that has already set aside the budget, that's money that we really can't use to help with our current budget situation. So we're not asking for more money from the federal government. We're just asking for flexibility for that initial money they gave us. So if you take that money, you take the reserves, and you reduce the spending increases, we can start to get this budget on some stronger foundations for when we go into next session. And that's going to be the tough one, because you're already hearing calls to impose an income tax, to impose a capital gains income tax. Some are taking advantage of this current situation, saying now is the time to remake the state's tax structure. But there are a lot of policy reasons not to do that, one of which is looking down to our friends in California. The reason why they are currently having the problems they're having is because they have those volatile capital gains income taxes. So it's not a path we want to go down. I know it's a lot of information I've just thrown at everybody, Miranda, but I know that we have a lot of questions coming. So we can get back to our panels and I can answer anything on the budget and the governor's powers.
Thank you, Jason. So at this time, I want to invite back Ajsa and David. And Jason, you can stay on, and we have time for one question for each of you. So my first question is going to be for Ajsa. If you could try to answer this in a couple of minutes so that we end on time tonight. So some say Washington has more unemployment fraud than any other state. Why is this, and what are you doing about it?
So the way our system is organized, and we were the first state to get hit with COVID-19 and starting to get people to apply for benefits. We started seeing at the same time number of fraudulent claims as well. We are talking about, last time we checked, it was going from 25 fraudulent claims to 700 fraudulent claims. And they're hitting these key states. I think Michigan, us, California, they have larger number of individuals applying for benefits and extended benefits for different individuals and so forth. And we are urging everybody that's doing the checking on the fraudulent claims to make sure you check on your Social Security, lock your credits, and protect yourself in any way you can, because obviously these individuals are high-level criminals, cybersecurity style, and they collected information. Now they are able to utilize it at this level and apply for these benefits.
Awesome, thank you. Next question is for David. So David, Hanford has been a major employer in the Tri-Cities for decades and will be for decades to come. However, a Hanford remediation is completed in the future and work at the site winds down. What do you believe the post-Hanford future looks like for the Tri-Cities? What industries could help fill this void and ensure continued economic growth in Central Washington?
Yeah, I think it'll be a mix of a lot of different industries. And I think when you look back, if you take a look back over the last 30 or 40 years at how the community has grown and the economy has diversified, the employment numbers at Hanford have stayed largely the same, but the rest of the community and the rest of the economy has grown. And so I think about looking into the future, it'll be kind of much of the same. But I do believe that there's a number of areas that I believe that we're particularly well suited for. Many of the ones I spoke to before, broadly speaking, the energy space, whether that be nuclear, energy storage, smart grid, or grid security, they're all, and also one of the big challenges I think we're going to have is how do you integrate all these intermittent renewables into the grid of the future, and that's another area where we have expertise. So that's certainly one area. I think one of the things that we'll be looking at doing is seeing if we can identify additional future missions for the Hanford site, whether they be Department of Energy related or otherwise. There's all sorts of potential opportunities to use that land, the expertise of the workforce, the security posture that we have there for a number of different missions. whether it be cybersecurity. There's also even some potential for some NASA-related work or DO, what they're now calling Space Force-related work that we're beginning to talk about. So there's opportunities there. And then I think lastly, well, I guess two other things I would quickly mention. Nobody in economic development can get away without saying that manufacturing, I mean, we all want manufacturing. That is the base jobs, that's the family wage jobs. And we'd certainly be wanting to explore opportunities in manufacturing, probably tied to some sort of technology, and possibly again to the reshoring efforts that might be going on in the future. And so manufacturing, and then I think the ag industry is going to continue to be a very strong and even more important player as we, as the population around the globe continues to rise. There's going to be more and more demand for the food that we produce here. And so innovation in agriculture, some of the technology that will require, that's another area for us to grow as well.
And just as a quick follow-up to that, what is TRIDEC doing in the immediate time frame to support business and development and entrepreneurship? It's like, what are some tangible things that TRIDEC is responsible for?
So, and specific to the circumstances we find ourselves in right now, we are working very closely with our economic development partners at the ports, at the cities and the counties, as well as the other business organizations in the community to really put together as much information as we possibly can. We have, I think, a website that provides a lot of great information with business resources and that sort of thing that businesses can go to. But then we're also doing advocacy, both primarily at the federal level, talking to congressional offices, kind of to Jason's point about if we are looking at making some changes to existing authorities or funding that's been made available, or if we're looking at any other future CARES bills or whatever it might be, how can we use those? How can we maneuver those in a way that's most beneficial to businesses? And then we are also, I think the last thing I would mention is that I think there's going to be a lot of uncertainty about reopening, and both in terms of making sure that businesses have the guidance that they need to do it effectively, but also to restore the confidence from the consumers and for the employees. And so also to give the business owners the tools that they need to do that. And in that respect, we're also working pretty closely with both local elected officials as well as the health district to try to get that information together in a very easily a digestible way as possible, because there's a lot of information out there.
Thanks, David. Okay, last question for Jason. And Jason, you have a couple of minutes, so feel free to fill in with anything else if this is a quick answer for you. So in light of how the government is responding to COVID-19, specifically the Washington state government, as we see legal challenges filed, do you think the courts will rein in these emergency orders and authorities?
Yeah, so several challenges have already been filed with what Governor Inslee has done. But as I mentioned, Washington's in a little bit different situation than what you have seen with the orders in Wisconsin and the order in Oregon, because those were based upon emergency powers that required a legislative check-in. That is not the case with Washington's law, so that's not a challenge that you would be successful on. One thing, though, that you'd want to keep an eye on is something that happened in the federal courts, primarily in the Sixth Circuit, concerning Kentucky's orders on churches. Is that Sixth Circuit ruling said that you can't distinguish between entities. So if something is safe for one entity, it is safe for another entity. And usually when you look at the history of emergency powers for governors, going all the way back to a US Supreme Court ruling in 1905, courts have given a lot of deference to those initial orders, as long as they can be shown to be reasonable and rational. The longer this goes on, though, if you're starting to have some discriminatory treatment between entities, that's where you might see some successful court rulings like happened in the Sixth Circuit. But what happened in Wisconsin, what happened in Oregon, is not really applicable in Washington because of the way our law is currently written.
All right, well, thank you all.
I think we may have lost Miranda. So I guess for the Policy Center, thank everybody for joining us. I know that there will be an archive posting of this. And thank you.
You'll join our young professionals community. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, good. I don't know where I stopped, but if you are between 18 to 40 years of age, we hope you'll join our young professionals community. We have events statewide, and hopefully we'll meet in person at our next summer social event in Tri-Cities. You can visit washingtonpolicy.org/youngprofessionals or click the link in the chat box to check us out. Our next event is May 28th, featuring filmmaker Chris Rufo on his recent documentary, America Lost. It's on poverty and how to rebuild America's families and communities from the bottom up. So we hope you'll join us for that. You can register at our website or click the link in the chat box. I also want to invite you to WPC's weekly virtual solution series events, open to all ages and free to attend. Join us next week on Wednesday or when your schedule allows. So check out those links in your chat box. I hope you walk away from tonight's event with a better understanding of what it's going to take to keep the Tri-Cities and Hanford area open for business with strong economies. I hope you will continue to advocate for policies that give more control to everyday people like you and me who care most about the economies of the cities that we live in. Thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of your evening and hope to see you next time in person.